All
Good
right.
morning. Oh, I'm
Yes.
just going to
No,
say
sorry. Go
quick good
ahead. Yeah.
morning. That's fine. Hi, my name is Carolyn. I am with Midwest Manufacturers Association, and today we're going to be talking about our manufacturing industry webinar series, When Variability Meets Capability, AI Augmentation and Operations. And we have our presenter, Bob Grogan from Victoria Fide. So at this time, I will turn it over to you and watch your emails. I'll be sending out a recording of this video either probably later today or tomorrow. And please share it with your coworkers, and it'll also be posted up on our YouTube page. So, all right, Bob, turning it over to you.
All right. Thank you. And welcome to those who are attending live and anyone that joins as we go, and whoever is watching after this gets posted. Um, for my part, my name is Bob Grogan. I currently do enterprise architecture for Victoriafied. I'm also an adjunct in operations and supply chain management at University of St. Thomas with a focus on digital systems. I've been had a career largely in technology, in manufacturing, retail, many other areas. Of course, the last couple of years, my focus has shifted to the use of AI and how it can help make work better. And as far as today is concerned, I want to try and show how AI can act as a bridge between people and systems and processes. So as you're thinking about whatever process you follow within your company, the different function areas where AI can and cannot help, and then focus on basically tactical ways that you can adopt AI with low risk and low cost, but measurable impact. So for my part, I do like an engaged audience. If you have a question, if you have a thought, don't hesitate to put it into the chat. If you have particular areas, because I will leave time for Q&A at the end. So if I don't get to your question right away, I promise I will address it after the presentation. So, a pretty straightforward agenda. We know the hype around AI. We know that there are promises and there are realities, and I just want to talk about it as a tool. Basically, it's an engineering effort and that has created this unique and useful machine. I want to talk about how and where different people, different organizations should think about adopting AI, what kind of AI you can adopt, and then walk through a couple of real world use cases from past clients and from past proposals. So with that as the context, um, I will start with this amazing machine. Well, some were proposing that we were going to get human-like intelligence right around the corner. That's not really interesting to me. What is interesting to me is how this came about. So I'll talk about AI as it currently exists a little bit. Generative AI is given to what's called a large language model, and ChatGPT is an example of one of those large language models. Essentially, it's a novel way of storing information. So books, videos, text, whatever, they have consumed the internet along with a whole lot of other content. And the way that they go about organizing information instead of your normal database where you might have a books table and a videos table, it stores information by concept. So if you feed it a lot of cat videos, it will store that along with information about cats as creatures, along with, say, the word cat in English and the word gato in Spanish will all be neighbors within this repository. And so then when you ask it questions, when you interact with it, it has the ability to retrieve this information and transform it as you need to. So that is how it can do text to speech, speech to text, English to Spanish, words into pictures. But it's really not good at 2 plus 2 being turned into 4. And that was one of the early jokes when people first got ChatGPT. They would try and have it do math, and it was notoriously bad because it's based on probability in this really complex brain. So, what does that actually do? Well, what has gotten better over the last year in particular is not the models themselves. They have gotten more efficient, they've gotten more effective, and definitely the core science continues to move forward. But what has changed most recently is that they gave the brain a calculator. So essentially, what an LLM is good for is interpretation and understanding. So if you feed 2 plus 2 and ask for an answer, the model understands that it needs to do a math problem, but it also understands that there's a thing called a calculator, and it runs a piece of software to actually do the calculation of 2 plus 2 and then give back the number 4. That's a simple example and pretty straightforward. But when it gets more complicated, is that means it can speak to a database schema. It can speak to a MES, manufacturing management system, or a warehouse management system without necessarily understanding that it's SAP or Siebel or what have you. It understands the components and the concepts behind a warehouse management system. And so that way, you can actually use it as a central hub to talk to different complex systems. And it will just translate and create a hybrid situation where it will get real information from those core systems and then perform synthesis and communicate that information back to the user in a way that is more understandable. That's another form of transforming information. And so it's this hybrid approach that really has the most interest, at least to people like me, and I think provides the best grounding for real and realistic solutions, particularly in something like a small to medium-sized business and especially in manufacturing or supply chain. So if we take a look at what I mean by that in the bigger picture, in technology, we like to break down the world of digital systems into these quadrants. You have the physical world, where you're actually trying to move stuff from one point to another, or you're trying to actually communicate and relate to another person. Um, and whether that's done by machines or by people. Then you have kind of your unstructured information, your documents, your manuals, your signatures on contracts. All of that is unstructured information that machines have historically had a very difficult time interpreting. And then you have your structured information, basically the data, the PLC processes that are supposed to happen exactly the same way again and again and again. And crossing the boundaries is where we've always had the difficulty. As examples that I've listed there, we write software to control machines, whether it's a robot arm or a packing station or what have you. You have to write the code, and then you have to test the code, and then you have to rewrite it, and so on and so forth until it does exactly what you're hoping for. And still, you wind up with scenarios that you weren't expecting. Similarly, we had the fax machine for a very long time because it was the only way to transmit a signature to confirm a contractual bound document at a distance. Now we have digital signing platforms, but even so, trying to interpret that is a difficult software challenge. These language models are able to cross those boundaries far, far easier than any other previous technology. And so, whereas an operator needs to read a screen, which is concrete information, but then the operator needs to sort of interpret that, an LLM can read the screen accurately and apply a little bit of understanding and then support the operator as they're making their next decision to make sure that they're reacting appropriately. So what this gets us to essentially is, okay, so we've got this technology, we've got this machine, this set of machines at our disposal. How do we actually make this useful? And this gets into where you have to have kind of a qualified partner that understands your situation, and then also understands the technology because otherwise you can wind up with a picture like this. This is a recent blueprint published by NVIDIA, one of the makers of core LLM technology, where they took that vision of a brain in a jar that's actually talking to the various systems and sensors within a given warehouse, that it takes in invoices and other activities that are taking place to help give the warehouse a brain. And while that is a great aspiration and a very interesting diagram, it is definitely not where anyone should start. Because if you don't have sort of that prototype, if you don't have the engagement of the people that are working in the warehouse and all of these other sort of traditional people, process, and technology components, it kind of doesn't matter how good the technology is, right? You won't necessarily get the results that you're hoping for. So how do you look for areas of opportunity? How we like to approach it and how I like to think about it is you have this jigsaw puzzle. You have a picture in mind that you're trying to achieve, but then you also have a box of pieces. And some people really like putting together jigsaw puzzles, my family included. But if you need the picture, then the action of putting together the puzzle is often painful. Well, what an LLM can do, as an example, in a very practical sense, is it can look at a box of puzzle pieces, and the ones where it sees the pictures, it can tell you exactly where they belong in the overall puzzle. Now, again, as a person, that's painful, right? If you haven't actually connected a puzzle piece to another piece as part of the picture, just putting it in the right place is not very helpful. And so this is why we look for this combination. We look to try and leverage what this machine is capable of, and the judgment and the sort of goal definition, the painting the picture that the people are much better at. And what that looks like is areas of information where they're just in lots of different forms and it's simply too much for one person to keep track of. We all have a lot of that. And yes, as we gain experience, as we've worked in the same environment for years and years, these things become natural, they become more automatic. But when you bring on someone new, all of a sudden you realize, oh, wow, I didn't realize we did it that way, right? I didn't realize that this wasn't intuitive. And so the more that you can look at it from with fresh eyes, the more you can understand where it would be nice to have a friendlier interface to that information. The second is you probably have machines, equipment that are producing streams of data, whether it's maintenance related or performance related. You just may not have a need or a technology that actually can watch that data stream to help you understand what's going well, what's going wrong, and get into areas like predictive maintenance, for example, to try and make sure that you're getting as effective use out of your equipment as possible. That's a less out of the box solution, right? You hopefully have some partnership with the vendor, the manufacturer of the equipment, to help interpret the data streams. But it is something where you wouldn't necessarily just capture it, throw it into a database, and then hope for the best later. You would want some sort of an intuition being applied to this, not necessarily a right answer, but something that could watch for patterns and changes to assist with that. And that, again, is where the AI layer has potential. And finally, and this is probably most important, especially in a company where you have people that wear many hats. And you have documented processes, and you have, that you're supposed to call this person in accounting and that person in procurement for various needs. But wouldn't it be nice if that information was just available in some central way, while still respecting the security, the access, permissions, all of that? And companies have, of course, tried to do this in the past by building custom software or buying new modules for the platforms that they have. And that has worked in many cases, but in other cases, the investment has not necessarily produced the value. And then as soon as the vendor changes you get a new version of your mez, all of a sudden your integration has broken again, and you have to do some repairs. So there's lots of challenges where when you don't have something straightforward and concrete, that you can simply automate in some way, where you need some flexibility, you need some understanding, but ultimately the information is concrete, right? The invoice, the CPQ output, the quantity of items to produce, those are all real numbers. You don't want the model to make that up. And this is where you can create a hybrid, and that way you can improve the communication even between people within your organization. So before I go on, I just wanted to check very quickly and see if there were any questions about anything up to this point that I can help with, or anything that I can make better sense of.
Hi, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a quick question. So this is Vivek Saxena.
Hmm.
Um, and the question is that when you read the use cases in AI, and there are, several publications that came in the beginning of the year from McKinsey, Deloitte, MIT, and they show a very high failure rate for AI projects, like 95% plus, right? But then if you dig deeper, you find that the worst scenarios are in manufacturing. In fact, very few people even trust AI for manufacturing. In
Hmm.
finance, marketing, supply chain, there are a lot of applications, but even just the number of applications within multiple enterprises, you don't see manufacturing being used using AI. What do you think is the reason for that?
I think there are a few causes for that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because yes, that study about the 95% failure rate made the rounds for sure. And if you go a little deeper further, and you start to see where enterprise adoption, right, the supposed promise of AI, if we just did everything with AI, right, that is not realistic, and that is where some companies jumped in the deep end, and they were quite disappointed as a result. Where in scenarios where you're really just trying to improve how your knowledge workers are functioning, kind of as you say, your marketing, your finance, what have you, um, and getting help with an email, right? The sort of individual task use cases, people are seeing some genuine benefit there, whether it's just creating more of the same, or actually better work, is still yet to be seen. But it's because of what I'm outlining that I think is the real challenge. I'm not talking about an AI automaton where it senses a vibration and then it changes a function in a machine. I'm talking about ways to empower the operator, and that takes a lot more analysis. It requires a lot more sort of planning and a strategic approach. And so I feel like the case for those initiatives is harder, because you don't have kind of that immediate feedback. And especially where in manufacturing, they're used to capital costs and run costs, and the digital systems that support the capital investment have always been a little squishy, if you will, in terms of how they contribute to productivity, because it's just kind of what you have to use. So I think there's a mindset, and I think that we're kind of clearing the hype around AI and trying to get to what realistic use cases look like. And I think manufacturing, you have a lot of just functional businesses that don't necessarily see the opportunity. They see more risk than opportunity. So I think those all kind of conspire, if you will. That's just based on my conversations, though. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of a good segue as well, because I feel like a lot of those features predate AI. There's a fair number of data science initiatives, of analytics and insights and other things like that that didn't necessarily produce the results at roughly the same rate for similar reasons. The leadership sponsorship, the understanding the disconnect between what's actually taking place and what the company believes is taking place. And so all of that messy reality interferes with our clean digital systems, at least in my experience. So to be more specific or think in terms of areas and scenarios that you might look at, I have met with companies that grew through acquisition, as an example. And so you wind up with multiple vendors, multiple ERPs, multiple MES, or warehouse management systems. And yes, in some cases, you get professional services from one of the vendors to do a data migration or to do an integration project. But it never quite goes the way that you hoped. So you want to look for areas where you have these multiple systems that do roughly the same job for similar functions. And sourcing is a good way to look at that because, of course, we're all familiar with the challenges of getting information from our supply chain. On the production side, it's rare to build a factory the way it is now from scratch. You probably had a building that then you repurposed space over time. You moved your inputs to a different area to make room for a new line. And so you have a combination of machines and processes, even when they're coming up with the same products, but they have different interfaces and different capabilities. And that's an area that just creates friction and also creates an opportunity for some of that normalization. In distribution, for the same reason, you may have customer records across these different ERPs because you might have different product lines that go through different digital channels. And so you have a difficult time understanding total lifetime value of a customer because all of these, you may even have different sales reps for different components and so on and so forth. That's another area where you would want to look for opportunity. And then, of course, sales is notorious for its turnover, and I'll go through a particular scenario there. And if you have a CPQ or you have a large product catalog, then that means that the burden on new hires and the burden on experienced salespeople to bring new hires up to speed winds up being very complicated. We're all familiar with the talent challenges across all of these functions. And of course, as you get more sophisticated, you can start looking at fulfillment in a more proactive way. If you have all of that information coming in, rather than checking on all of your orders, ideally, you would have an AI that watches for disruptions, changes in information that you're not expecting, and can also watch production to see how impactful those changes will be. But that's, again, a little farther down the line. I want to talk about some of the more near-term types of scenarios that you can start implementing relatively quickly and with fairly minimal risk. So with that as my own segue, we can talk through a couple of these scenarios. So as I mentioned, especially in rural communities, especially with kids these days, if you will, we were talking about that offline before the webinar, and manufacturing not necessarily being the attractive occupation, it's obviously gaining as kids get more familiar with all of the different dimensions, but still there's a challenge. There's a gap between your baby boomers with all of their experience and expertise aging out of their positions and then trying to bring in recruits to fill that in. How can you make that better? You think about your traditional methods of job shadowing, of mentorship, and those are never going to go away. You have to have the hands-on. You have to have the partnership between the experienced and the junior. But watching videos is not the same as, we're all familiar. How can we reduce the impact of turnover, which is inevitable even at good employers, and make this onboarding more successful? Well, at one particular client, we had some interesting findings. We definitely had a gap between how things get done and how things are defined as standard work. And there are always reasons for that, right? Whether it's good reasons to improve productivity or it's shortcuts, you have operators and technicians that are more effective than others because they've just seen it before. Also, you have, as I mentioned before, you have lines with a higher operational efficiency, but they wind up being more complex. They have better digital supports. They have more modern interfaces. They can do more at a faster speed, but it means that when something does go wrong, the operator really needs to understand the particulars and the warnings and the errors. If you've seen them before, if you know it's Tuesday at 2 p.m., then it makes total sense. But if you don't have that built-in experience, then you have to relearn it each time. And then, of course, the variety of HMIs across lines also makes the cross-training difficult. To kind of think about this in terms of the personal versus the organizational, there are tools right now that you can just download from the App Store where you could point at an HMI screen in English and it will give you a picture of that same screen in a different language. That is ways in which individuals might be trying to work around these challenges. And that's an example of where you want to make sure as you're building these solutions or building these use cases that the people who are doing the work are contributors to the definition of what would be valuable, what would be helpful. So in this case, we used audio and video recording to actually capture operators and technicians as they were doing their jobs. So you didn't necessarily have them doing every job. That's, again, where the difference between kind of just documenting what gets done and hoping people read the documentation versus getting a sense of how this line behaves and how it performs, making sure that you capture specific errors, specific warnings, and troubleshooting steps from the manual, from the documentation, so that you combine that intuition with the human in the loop to actually get this hybrid approach. So from transcripts, and you can capture images at points in the video alongside the transcript so that you can create documentation of what was happening without having to have someone sit through a 2-hour video. You can extract the highlights and the important notes, combine those with the concrete documentation, say a PDF of the operator manual, and really get a more holistic in the moment education for someone that is not familiar. And so that's as you get comfortable with a solution like that, then you can even extend that into metrics territory and start watching things like MTTR and how this is improved or not as you expect. You can watch for gaps and create new articles that are then introduced into the knowledge base that weren't captured originally, and basically create this kind of living documentation, this living knowledge base for everyone. The second picture, which I mentioned a little earlier, and this is slightly more technical, but not nearly as technical as it used to be, because from a trend perspective, one of the things that I want to emphasize, and one of the things that has been challenging for my colleagues that are software engineers, is that the creation of software code keeps getting cheaper and easier. And while, again, if you're writing a platform for thousands or millions of people to use simultaneously, then you still need that engineering practice. You need the DevOps. You need all of the rigor to make sure that as you put it out into the wild as a SaaS platform, that it works as expected. But when you're actually just writing code to solve a problem, which is what, as I mentioned before, the LLMs do for themselves. If you ask an LLM to create a slideshow, they will actually create Python code that then writes the HTML that then actually creates the slideshow. You may see this, you may not. It may just do it behind the scenes, but that's why the ability for something like Claude or ChatGPT to make those results for you has gotten better. Is it's not trying to just generate it from its learned experience. That's how you wind up with six-fingered hands and some of those funnier examples. It's combining its knowledge, its training with a concrete expectation from the user. And so again, I know I've beat this to death, but it's really important to understand that what I'm talking about is an extension of what the technology is already doing internally, and that's when you tend to have better success. So in this particular case, what you can do is let's say you have a particular platform that manages your EHS incidents, as an example, and you run reports or you have IT run reports, and you get them on an hourly or a monthly basis, but you really wish that you could kind of get more trend analysis, but the vendor just doesn't have an interest in making that for you. You're on the roadmap, as they say, right? But they do have what's called an API, an application programming interface. So in the same way that EDI communicates between nodes in the supply chain, orders and invoices and what have you, APIs are a more general way that software talks, different pieces of software talk to each other. And as I mentioned before, you might have three different WMS systems for three different warehouses, and you have to check on all three of them for one reason or another. What you can do if they all have these APIs is you can feed those three APIs to a large language model and say, please create me a sheet, a clean sheet of inventory across these warehouses, along with invoices and orders and schedules. And so instead of having a developer that has to go in and understand the difference between capital ID and underscore ID for a particular piece of equipment or stock, the LLM will fill in those gaps. It will look at the API endpoints, which will have objects like inventory by SKU. It will have endpoints like shipments. And it will understand those and take care of the particulars about the payload, the digital payload that it has to send in order to get that information back for you, and then create a web page or a website that displays that information. Now, this is something that is definitely, I mean, the first time it did that for me was amazing, and quite frankly, I did it last week. It's still amazing. And so if you would like more of a in-depth demonstration of how something like that can come about, I'm happy to go further with this. But just understand, again, whereas you've had gaps or challenges potentially with IT partners or vendors, by establishing the existing guidelines, right? If you give the LLM read-only access to a database, read-only access to an API, because you're not ready and probably will never be ready to have the computer actually change things on your behalf, you can still create a system that now the API, the AI doesn't have to be a part of, but your end users have a better picture than they did before. They spend less time logging into multiple systems, and they spend more time getting their work done. So I only have one other scenario to walk through. I'll pause there again and ask if there are any particular questions or anything that I can clarify further up to this point.
Bob, do you see any concern about the data confidentiality. I'm not talking security per se, but just confidentiality if you're using LLMs.
Hmm.
And have you used or have come across applications that use sort of privatized, if you like, SLMs, small language models, for these same use cases?
Absolutely. So uh, that's why I like questions. I need to understand how deep would be valuable. So on the one hand, I had an interesting due diligence recently where an EHS vendor was trying to sell an AI module extension to their platform. Great, help with incident management and some of the things that I've been talking about. But when I asked how they did that, what they were actually doing was packaging up data from their platform and sending it to Gemini. And for those who don't know, Gemini is the public language model provided by Google. That is terrible. I mean, it's not just terrible, it's inexcusable. Where they're actually passing PHI to a public language model and then having it returned back for this additional functionality. So you absolutely cannot take the word of vendors because you have to have that level of understanding when you're dealing with secure, confidential, compliance type of information. Having said that, um, the it is possible to host solutions of this type even on a tablet. Another model that Google provides is called Flash. And the Flash model is meant to be done on the edge. I can provide more resources on this, but essentially, when they launched the Flash model, they started a contest. They said, who in the world can come up with a scenario that would be useful for running a language model on a tablet? Because, of course, there's your typical constraints. It's not going to be as fast, it's not going to be as powerful, and so on and so forth, because there's lots of processing power behind ChatGPT. But you still get the intuition, you still get the transformation. And so that's part of the solution analysis is how confidential is that data? For personal projects, what has changed most importantly is that if you pay a subscription, you have a setting on all of the major vendors where you can turn off train the model using my conversations. And in that sense, your public models, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, and others, are as risky as uploading documents to your Drive folder, right? We're very familiar with cloud solutions for various formats. We're very trusting of our cloud providers, AWS, Google, Azure, what have you, with securing our information in ways that we expect. But in order to do that, you have to understand the terms that you're entering into. You have to have a commercial relationship because that's when you have more authority over your information. So maybe that's more than you asked for, but yes, you can self-host if you have kind of confidential information. You do want to understand how the information is getting transmitted, either by the vendor or within a given solution. But in most ways, this is just an extension of best practice of existing digital systems.
Hey, Bob, I have
So,
one question that was on the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to look at that. Thank you for bringing it up.
Oh,
So the chat is, what is the relationship between business intelligence reporting from an ERP system and potential AI-generated BI reports? This is a great question. There's a lot of it depends. So I'll go with sort of common scenarios, but the baseline is flexibility. In many cases, particularly with certain global vendors, it's very expensive to get particular reports created for you. And you get in a queue and they show up and they do the work. The funny thing about that is they probably have done the exact same report for a dozen different customers with slightly different variations. And you may not have the understanding of, say, the freshness of the data that's going into the report because it's integrating with other systems. And it's very hard to know all of those kinds of details when you provide a spec to someone that is trying to create the reports, or to a product where you get kind of the out of the box reports. So what I would say is there are two dimensions for this. The first is, do you actually need a report, or do you need an answer? And so by now, most of us are familiar with the chat interfaces. Wouldn't it be great if, instead of going through a 40-page report to find the particular SKU at the particular location and get the current inventory as of January 5th, and instead you said, hey, AI, tell me what the inventory is of this SKU at this time, and let it figure out which WMS it needs to contact. Let it figure out which API to call, and then return you the answer of 38. So that's on the one hand, is that reporting is kind of our default solution, but it isn't always the most optimal solution. But neither is training your procurement team to write SQL queries, right? So that's where the bridge is most powerful. The other part is creating interfaces over data is also very challenging, where you have filters and complex user interfaces. That way you get more timely information, but you don't necessarily get interpretation. You don't get that transformation or the visuals that are exactly the way that you like. And so you have lots of people who will take the report and then they'll just take out the data and put it into Excel to put it in the format that they want. Because the cost of creation is falling, you can now create bespoke views in ways that are far easier and cheaper. And so that way, again, you can produce reports, because you still may want those time and point in time snapshots, but you can do so for stakeholders with the information that's actually relevant to them without a lot of additional engineering investment. Does that answer the question? So again, happy to have follow-ups and go deeper on any of these. The one last one that I wanted to cover, because it's really important to understand, especially in kind of the mid-market, as you're trying to compete with larger incumbents, or with better cost profiles. Like, how do you differentiate? You have to understand what makes you special, right? Why do your customers come to you and not to Amazon? And there are always reasons for that. That's why you have a functional business. But and that's where entering into production may not be the right place to start, for all of the reasons that I was mentioning earlier about manufacturing. That may be where you're best and where it's particular. And that means the solutions that you introduce must really match what you do to be effective and not disruptive. Sales is a different thing. Yes, I am not a salesperson. I never could be. I respect them and sort of the role that they play, but sales is still a capability of a person, right? It's a mentality. And if you find someone who is a good salesperson, you can develop them with an understanding of your manufacturing, of your product line, of your customer base, often much easier than going the other direction, trying to turn an operator into a salesperson. And as an example, I had AI, of course, create a request for quote process. And it doesn't have too much of a challenge for that. Some of these steps you may be familiar with. Some of these may be incidental in your particular process if you're more on the product side versus the job side. But ultimately, if you have a sales team that handles request for quote, these are some pretty common steps. And so even when we're considering doing the work for this company, I can pass this as a candidate process instead of starting from a blank sheet of paper, and then have the client work through this and provide their version, their sort of how they do it as a sales team in response. And it just makes kind of the consulting process more efficient. Well, that's a lot of what we call toil in AI development. You bring on someone new, and maybe they're an excellent salesperson, or maybe they're a recent graduate and they just have a kind of a head for people, or whatever caused them to be attractive as a new member of your sales team. Getting them familiar with the product catalog, with the CPQ, with all of these other details, and making sure that that is right, so that they don't overpromise and underdeliver, so that they don't commit production to something that is not possible to make, or different timelines. That's again where you have information in lots of different sources. So you have your tribal knowledge problem. You have salespeople that like to keep their notes, that like to keep their call logs, and maybe they update the CRM after a call, and maybe they don't. You have your invoices and your finance perspective that gives you a general sense of customer lifetime value, but you don't have you may not understand from an analysis standpoint the seasonality or the product mix or how they've evolved as a customer over time. These are where you can take in these large volumes of data, this combination of a call log that is transcribed, and that's why note-taking apps have become so popular, because the more that you're taking notes, the less engaged you are with the person you're talking to. And so this is a great scenario, because precise note-taking is not as important as that engagement and that refresh and that summarization. So you can accept some of the mistakes, but then when it comes to actually, did we deliver what we promised? Well, we have a record of that. Did they pay on time? We have a record of that. And so now you can educate a salesperson on the concrete aspects of making sure that you're relating to customers in the way that they need, you're providing the information, and you're communicating with production, sort of what an ERP promises to do, but really still has pretty segmented and siloed information and interfaces for. You have the potential to create a useful sales interface. And again, this is an area where many of the vendors have latched on fairly quickly, right? They understand that, like Salesforce understands that many Salesforce instances are a complete mess, but it's your mess. And so trying to create a generic solution to your mess is still challenging. But it's also very extensible. You don't have to have all the sources of information to start helping your sales team. You can just collect all of the notes and combine that with the CRM to get a better customer picture, and then add finance or add production or add material costs subsequently. And that's the other nice part about having a more strategic or tactical perspective, where you incorporate the feedback of the people doing the work, is that you don't have to have that upfront capital investment be so high. You can iterate, and even in some cases throw away. You can say, wow, we thought that was going to be useful and it wasn't, but here's what we learned, and now we're going to go make something better. And the ability to kind of iterate and incorporate, I feel like is where the greatest potential exists. So I'll kind of close and say the takeaways that I hope you have gotten is that LLMs at heart are complex machines that organize information. They're not going to magically create capabilities unless you give it to them, right? If they don't have the permission to delete a record from your database, just like another person does, then they're not going to invent it for themselves. They are still functionally a machine. They just handle cognitive information, which is what is novel. For successful initiatives, make sure you define the goals and you build your process map, and the people impacted are incorporated before you try and develop a solution. And then keep in mind that measurable impact can be realized with very limited targeted investment, because, and this is another important aspect, right now, all of that money going into artificial intelligence is creating a consumer subsidy. You are getting more than you're paying for at this point. Whether their efficiency will catch up for that and they'll keep the price points, or whether they will just start expecting more revenue because they're providing more value, well, nobody can say for sure. But right now, experiment, because the costs for the capabilities, I have a hard time seeing being lower than they are right now. This is my favorite analogy. If you think about the transition from steam to electricity, that took roughly 40 years, even though electricity was a far superior product, because just using an electric generator to replace a steam turbine didn't actually help that much. It just turned the same crank. But when factories started being built around distributed electricity, so they could distribute power to large and small motors, they could start staging their materials more effectively. They could have lights that enabled an additional shift. All of those sorts of things that steam could not provide. That still took time, but it had to be rethought. It wasn't just swapping one for the other. And that's where we're at with this round of AI. We're in the very early stages of rethinking how we do things to get better results. So that's all I had. Any final thoughts or questions? Happy to follow up afterwards via email or whatever makes sense as well. All right. Well, I actually did the timing much better than I expected, so this is great.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. I will be sending out the recording, and please, we want to thank Bob for spending your time with us and sharing your expertise. It was really very interesting. So, hopefully, we'll have you present for us again at a later date.
Absolutely. Just
All
let me
right.
know what would be helpful.
All right. Thanks, guys. All righty. Bye.
Thank you.